Robert, a soldier who faced what he called El Diablo in the desolate jungles of Central America. What you are about to witness is not just war, but a darkness that transcends human imagination. December 1986, the Christmas spirit should have been vibrant with lights and bells. But here, amidst the Honduran jungle, there was only the suffocation of humidity and the bone-chilling cold from the thick fog. Robert, a military engineer with the 27th Airborne Engineer Battalion, never expected that the mission to build an airfield near the Rio Coco would turn into a lifelong nightmare. Just a routine job, he told himself. But deep down, he sensed something wrong lurking. The Rio Coco wasn't just a river. It was the boundary between life and death, between peaceful Honduras and chaotic Nicaragua. The dark, swift current seemed to carry whispers from hell, making the soldiers in Robert's unit tremble. Borders like these are often where supernatural entities appear, as if war had torn open the veil between our world and the abyss. This was Robert's first time away from the United States, away from his family, spending Christmas deep in the jungle. He wasn't excited at all. "You're a soldier. Gotta get used to this," he mumbled to himself, hand tightening on his rifle. But the cold didn't come from the weather, but from strange sounds echoing from the thickets, like the hoarse laughter of a predator observing its prey from the shadows. Robert's unit's mission seemed simple: build an airfield, support the Honduran army, and secure the border against threats from the Contras and Sandinistas. But this jungle was unlike any battlefield he had known. Dark shapes flickered through the fog, so fast he wasn't sure if they were real or just illusions. "Something's not right here," a comrade whispered, eyes glued to the empty space. Robert's story is one of the most haunting cases. He recounted that on his first night in Honduras, he heard a low growl. Not of a wild animal, but of something larger, more ancient. It resembled no creature he'd learned about in military manuals. That was the first sign of El Diablo. Robert didn't want to retell this story.
"They'd think I was crazy,"
he told me over the phone years later, his voice trembling. His superiors had laughed at him, even threatened disciplinary action when he reported what he saw. But I knew the terror in his eyes wasn't a lie. "I'm Robert," he began, "and I encountered something nobody would believe. A real demon in the flesh." That night, thick fog enveloped the camp like a living shroud, swallowing all light from the flickering oil lamps. Robert stood guard, his breath turning to white mist in the damp air. Suddenly, he heard footsteps, heavy, slow, as if a giant was approaching from afar. "Anyone there?" he shouted, but only the whistling wind answered, cold and menacing. Honduras in the 80s was a land of chaos, where the proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union turned everything to dust. Nicaragua, across the river, was engulfed in fire and blood, with Sandinistas and Contras locked in endless conflict. But Robert wasn't afraid of guerrillas or bombs. He feared what hid in the jungle, something I suspect was a supernatural entity awakened by the chaos of war. Robert's unit came from Fort Bragg, trained to deal with tangible enemies. But El Diablo wasn't something they could shoot down with guns. One night, when the moon was hidden by clouds, Robert saw it. A tall, imposing figure, its eyes glowing red like embers, standing silently among the trees.
"It looked right at me,"
he recounted,
"and I swear, I felt my soul being pulled out of my body."
Building the airfield near the village of Hamastron wasn't just an engineering project. It was a chilling warning sent to Nicaragua. Don't cross the line, unless you want to face hell. Only 15 miles from the border, its location was like a knife at the throat, ready to sever any invasive intent. This was classic psychological warfare, a power play the US military had mastered over centuries. The airfield wasn't just concrete and steel. It was a symbol of threat, a whisper on the wind that the enemy was being watched. I knew it well. Nicaragua wasn't the real danger here, but something waiting in the deep jungle, ready to exploit this chaos. Robert's unit was equipped with live ammunition, but their hands were tied by vague orders. The United States had not officially declared war on Nicaragua, creating a risky, legal gray area.
We weren't allowed to fire first,
Robert told me, his voice still tinged with frustration.
But if something attacked from the darkness, I wasn't sure bullets would be enough to protect us.
Self-defense was the only limit, a thin line between life and death. This situation recalled the early days of the Vietnam War, confusing rules of engagement where a small mistake could lead to tragedy. But in Honduras, death didn't just come from visible enemies. Robert felt it, a cold presence, as if the jungle itself was breathing and watching his every step. Besides construction, Robert's battalion also had to patrol the border with Honduran soldiers, shows of force to intimidate the opposition. But every time they ventured deeper into the jungle, the air grew heavier. "Something's wrong," a Honduran soldier whispered, clutching the cross around his neck. They weren't just monitoring Contras. They were entering the territory of something far more ancient. Robert, a radio specialist from Tennessee, wasn't used to wielding picks and shovels. "I can drive a tractor if they need me to," he told me, forcing a smile. But his duty was to accompany the patrols, carrying his old radio like a talisman. Deep in the jungle, the crackling static was sometimes interrupted by strange sounds, like the hiss of a creature not of this world. The winding dirt roads near the Rio Coco were a nightmare for any patrol. Visibility was obscured by dense vegetation and thick fog, turning them into easy prey.
We were half blind,
Robert recounted.
But I swear, sometimes I felt like I was being stared at. Not by people, but by something in the shadows.
Intelligence from reconnaissance aircraft in the Soto Cano base often arrived late or was too vague to be useful. Suspicious vehicle near the river, unidentified group of individuals. Reports like these didn't prepare them for what was coming. Because border regions like the Rio Coco are often where supernatural entities manifest, and this time, they weren't just watching. One fateful morning, around 10:30 a.m., as Robert's patrol trudged along the dusty red road, the radio suddenly crackled.
There's a small boat.
The voice on the other end came through, hesitant.
Or something like a boat, moving upstream, a few miles from you.
The uncertainty in the voice made the hair on Robert's neck stand up. He knew this wasn't normal. They received orders to assemble at coordinates near the riverbank, approaching by land to verify.
Move it,
Sergeant Perez yelled, his voice hoarse with tension. Robert quickly coordinated over the radio, heart pounding as the team jumped into their vehicle, speeding past dilapidated thatched huts. He wondered,
if it's not a boat, then what the hell is waiting for us there?
Updates over the radio only made things stranger.
It's moving erratically, sometimes fast, sometimes stopping.
The crackling voice reported.
What is it?
A young soldier mumbled, eyes fixed on the deep jungle. Robert felt the unease spreading, not from Contras, but from something toying with them, like a cat playing with a mouse before the kill.
Base, clarify. Are there people on it? What's its size?
Robert shouted into the radio, trying to keep his voice steady, though his hands trembled.
No passengers sighted, no details clear.
The reply came back, cold and vague. In such a sensitive area, lack of information wasn't just worrying. It was a sign of something terrible about to happen.
Roger. We're closing in. We'll report upon visual contact,
Robert confirmed. But inside, fear had risen like a wild beast. When the vehicle stopped, 3 men stayed behind to guard it. While Robert, Sergeant Perez and 4 other soldiers plunged into the jungle, heading towards the riverbank half a mile away. The rustling leaves underfoot mingled with the whispers of the wind. Or was it something else waiting? As they neared the riverbank, the air grew heavy, as if the jungle itself was squeezing their chests. Robert saw the dark water of the Rio Coco glimmering through the trees, and in that moment, he heard a sound. Not a boat engine, but a low growl, like the laughter of the El Diablo he'd encountered in his previous nightmare. "It's here," he whispered, tightening his grip on his rifle, unsure if he was about to face man or demon. The horrifying truth hidden beneath nature's serene facade, the area near the Rio Coco riverbank wasn't as dense as deeper in the jungle. Open meadows stretched out, where sunlight shone but brought a feeling of emptiness, of unease. Robert's team couldn't hide easily, like prey exposed before an invisible hunter. They dashed through sparse thickets, crossing a cattle farm thick with the smell of earth and manure. 2 rows of sharp barbed wire scratched their uniforms as they passed, leading to an open field. "Hurry, no time," Sergeant Perez yelled, his voice hoarse with worry. Robert felt his heart pound, not just from running, but from the premonition that something awaited them ahead. The field had been cleared for cattle grazing, but its emptiness felt like a deadly invitation. Across it, 100 yards or so away, the Rio Coco flowed silently, its murky brown surface reflecting the dim light. I've read accounts that places like this, where humans interfere with nature, often awaken ancient entities, forgotten monsters from prehistoric times. They sought cover behind a few large trees near the river, but the vegetation had been cleared for cattle access to water, leaving them nearly exposed.
"Watch out. Stay hidden,"
Perez whispered, staring intently at the water. Robert felt the cold rising from the river, not from the wind, but from something lurking beneath the dark surface. A threat far beyond any intelligence report. The patrol hugged the edge of the woods, maintaining a distance of 1626 feet from the riverbank to avoid detection.
"Robert, over here,"
Perez signaled, his hand gripping his rifle as if it were his last refuge.
"Wallace, down there. Hold position."
The rustling leaves underfoot mixed with their rapid breathing, but there was no sign of the boat the radio mentioned. Only a terrifying silence enveloping them. Upstream, the water remained calm. The last radio report insisted the boat was still approaching, but no one saw anything but the quiet river. "Where is it?" a young soldier whispered, his voice trembling. Cold sweat trickled down Robert's spine. He knew if it wasn't appearing. Perhaps it was already here, hiding somewhere in the jungle's shadows. They waited in silence, the tension suffocating. The chirping of insects suddenly ceased, as if the entire jungle held its breath with them. "Solo Whiskey 4, it must be coming from your direction. Report immediately if you see anything." The staticky radio voice crackled, but the sound only made the atmosphere heavier. Robert felt a cold draft brush his neck, like the breath of something standing right behind him. A few minutes passed, each second stretching into an eternity. Suddenly, Wallace let out a soft cry, his voice breaking with fear. "I see something. A dark object. There." Everyone turned, holding their breath, looking where he pointed. A dark shape materialized dimly on the water, slowly drifting closer. "What is that?" Robert mumbled, his hand trembling on the trigger, unsure if he was facing reality or a nightmare.
"Is that what they told us to find?"
Another soldier whispered, eyes wide. "Looks like a log, or a gator." But Perez shook his head, squinting. "No, too big for a gator. It looks like..." He stopped, as if afraid to speak the name of what was present. I suspect this wasn't a natural creature, but a cryptid, a monster from the ancient legends of this land. "A submarine?" One soldier joked weakly, but but the smile died when no one responded. "Hold position. Do not fire," Perez barked, his voice sharp. "No names over the radio. Absolutely no firing." Robert felt his heart skip a beat. Not because of the order, but because he realized this thing didn't need guns to kill them. It had chosen them as prey long ago. And then, from the murky brown water of the Rio Coco, it surfaced. Not a boat, not a log, not an alligator, but a giant snake of a size beyond human comprehension. Its body stretched for tens of yards, black scales shimmering faintly in the weak light, like a living nightmare stepping out of hell. "Dear God!" Wallace screamed, his voice breaking in terror. "Look at those teeth!" Another soldier cried out, pointing a trembling finger towards the monster's gaping maw, where razor-sharp fangs flashed like knives. Its eyes, cold, soulless, yet gleaming with cruel intelligence, swept over the cattle on the bank. I had heard stories of giant snakes in Central American mythology, but this was the first time one manifested in flesh and blood. It's choosing its prey," Robert stammered, feeling the blood freeze in his veins. The snake wasn't rushing. It observed, calculated, like a seasoned predator savoring the fear of its quarry before striking. A low growl rumbled from its throat, mingling with the sound of the flowing water, leaving the entire patrol paralyzed in horror. Suddenly, with terrifying, impossible speed, the snake lunged onto the bank, its massive body slithering across the ground like a black whirlwind. It aimed straight for a hapless cow grazing nearby, its wide-open jaws engulfing the prey in an instant. "It's dragging it into the water," Wallace yelled, his eyes wide as he watched the cow get pulled into the river, leaving only pathetic bellows echoing in the air. "What the hell is this?" One soldier screamed, his voice lost in sheer terror, as if he had just witnessed the gates of hell opening. And I can tell you, what they faced wasn't just a creature. It was the embodiment of primal fear, a monster far beyond human understanding. "You were wrong about one thing, Sergeant," Robert said, his voice trembling, eyes fixed on the horrific scene before him. A giant snake slaughtering cattle like a god of death. "What?" Perez replied, his voice choked, still reeling from the shock. "That thing is definitely not." "A garbage bag," Robert answered, trying to maintain some semblance of sanity amidst the unfolding nightmare. Everything happened too fast, like a horror film on fast forward. The snake surged from the dark waters of the Rio Coco, lunging at a group of 4 cows with its enormous head like a wrecking machine. The force of the impact sent 3 cows flying like rag dolls, blood splattering across the meadow. "God, it's so fast!" Wallace cried out, his hand trembling on his rifle. Its speed was unbelievable, as if the laws of physics bent before the monster's supernatural power. The panicked cattle scattered, their desperate cries echoing. But the snake didn't stop. It charged into a second group, repeating the brutal attack, blood and dirt spraying in horrific red streaks. I suspect this wasn't just a snake. It bore the marks of an ancient cryptid, awakened by war and chaos. Then the snake slowly raised its head, towering like a lethal spire, at least 10 to 13 feet above the ground. A primal image, full of power and terror. Its glowing red eyes flashed in the dim light, like 2 embers from hell. It's not of this world," a soldier whispered, his voice breaking in absolute fear. Apparently having chosen its prey, the snake abruptly slammed its head down onto an injured cow. The sound of shattering bone echoed dryly, grotesquely, like a death knell tearing through the silence. "I guess it was so big," Robert recounted to me later, his voice still shaking at the memory. "It didn't need to constrict. Just crushing was enough." That sound, the sound of a body being destroyed, would haunt him for the rest of his life. The cow lay instantly still, blood pooling red on the ground. Instinctively, Wallace raised his rifle, his eyes wild with fear. "Don't!" Perez yelled, gesturing forcefully to lower weapons. "That thing's too big. Bullets will only piss it off." His voice was hoarse, filled with helplessness. Robert felt the cold truth. They had no way to fight this monster. Robert wasn't sure how intelligent the snake was, but he swore it had seen them earlier. When it emerged from the water, its cold gaze swept over their hiding spot, as if assessing whether they were worth attacking. "It knew we were there," he whispered to me. "But maybe the cows were a better meal." This was a sign of an ancient intelligence, far beyond that of a normal animal. After crushing its prey, the snake raised its head again, opening its mouth impossibly wide. It engulfed nearly the entire cow, the animal's head dangling from one side, its hind legs leaving a trail of blood on the ground. "Look, it's swallowing the whole cow," a soldier cried out, disgust mixed with fear in his voice. The sight was both absurd and terrifying, a defiance of all natural laws. Then the snake dragged the enormous carcass into the water, its sleek black body gliding away as silently as a ghost. It slid right past them, so close Robert could feel the cold radiating from its scales. It was like it was taunting us, he recounted, his voice faint at the memory. The water swallowed the monster, leaving behind a ravaged riverbank and stunned, silent soldiers. When the snake disappeared, they stood frozen in heavy silence, staring at the now calm water as if nothing had happened. The wind whistling through the meadow sounded like the hoarse laughter of an unseen entity. "We have to get out of here now," Robert thought, his legs trembling, wanting to run back to the truck and escape this deadly land. It was an absolute nightmare, a blatant violation of every natural law Robert had ever known. Primal fear surged within him, as if he had just touched upon a terrible secret of the universe. "I can't believe that thing exists," he told me later, his eyes still reflecting the horror. But deep down, he knew he had seen the truth, a truth no one wanted to face. "But you know us soldiers," Robert chuckled grimly as he recounted. Despite the overwhelming fear, a morbid curiosity won out. They wanted to understand, to know what that monster was, even if it might lead them to their deaths. Encounters like these naturally leave a permanent mark on the human psyche, a scar that never heals. After the giant snake vanished, Robert's team began discussing, or rather, fiercely arguing, about its actual size. 50 feet, one shouted. "No, it had to be 100 feet, another countered. No one agreed, but they all trembled, thinking about the monster that had just slithered past them. 3 soldiers, still gripped by morbid curiosity, decided to measure. They paced from the riverbank to the spot where they remembered the snake's head, being when its tail disappeared underwater. 31 paces, one counted. 33 here, said the second. 34, the last concluded. Based on the rough soldier's pace count, they estimated it was 75 to 80 feet long, an insane figure, far beyond any scientific record, as if they had just touched a living legend. On the meadow, only the injured cows remained, legs broken, moaning pitifully in the fading sunlight. "It'll come back," a soldier whispered, eyes darting towards the dark river. "My previous research indicates that creatures like this don't just hunt. They mark territory, and Robert's team might have unknowingly entered its domain." Fear surged again, stronger than ever. "All right, that's enough," Sergeant Perez yelled, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "Let's go. Right now." Curiosity vanished, replaced by the instinct for survival. They headed back to the truck. Footsteps hurried on the red earth. But Robert felt the snake's cold eyes still watching from beneath the water, like an unfinished warning. On the way, Robert's radio suddenly crackled.
"Have you spotted the boat yet?"
Bass asked, the voice monotone, oblivious. Robert glanced at Perez, heart pounding. "Tell them we'll report when we reach the vehicle," Perez ordered, his eyes betraying his unease. He knew no one at base would believe what they had just witnessed. Or worse, they wouldn't want to believe. When they reached the truck, Perez began reporting over the radio, his voice trembling as he described the giant snake. But before he could finish, a cold voice cut him off.
"Maintain absolute radio silence on this incident. Return to Sotocano base immediately for debriefing. Each man submit an individual report."
The order was sharp as a knife, hitting them like cold water, stunning the whole team into silence. The drive back to Sotocano was agonizingly long, not just because of the distance, but because of the heavy atmosphere. The engine's roar mingled with ragged breaths, but no one dared speak. They heard what Perez said, Robert thought, and they don't want this getting out. It seemed superiors might have known about entities like this for a long time, and they would do anything to conceal the truth. "Maybe they thought we were joking on the radio," one soldier mumbled. No one laughed. A bad feeling descended upon them like a dark shroud. They weren't just dealing with the snake, but with a military secret that could swallow them whole. Robert felt his throat go dry, as if he had just stepped into a new nightmare. Upon arriving at the base, no relief awaited them. A group of men in uniform stood ready, faces stern as stone statues. An American major led them, his eyes sharp and cold, flanked by 2 Honduran officers and a civilian man, possibly a local informant. "They're not happy," Robert whispered to Wallace, but no one dared meet their gaze.
"We'd been chewed out before,"
Robert recounted to me.
"But this was different. Seeing the worried looks we exchanged, I knew this wasn't simple."
Names were called out one by one, each man led away like a prisoner. When it was Robert's turn, he felt his heart pound violently, as if he were about to enter a secret trial. Robert was escorted to a car. The door opened coldly. A lieutenant and 2 other soldiers got in with him, none speaking. The air inside was thick with tension, the smell of sweat and cigarettes mingling with invisible fear. "It felt very ominous," he recounted, "like I wasn't a soldier anymore, but a witness who needed to be silenced." The car drove to an area behind the base, far from the main runway, where the light faded and shadows dominated. I'd heard of places like this, hidden corners of military bases where truths are buried. The car stopped before a small, nondescript building, but its very plainness made it more terrifying. Robert was escorted inside, his steps heavy on the cold concrete floor. The door slammed shut behind him, the click of the lock echoing like a sentence being passed. What do they want from me? He wondered. But deep down, he knew. The snake wasn't the only secret here. Something larger, darker, awaited him in this room. Robert was led down a dark hallway to a room at the end, on the right. The room was stark, empty except for a few chairs and an old table. But its simplicity radiated a chilling coldness, like a tomb waiting to bury the truth. What unsettled Robert wasn't the emptiness, but that the room had only one door and no windows. A single yellow bulb hung suspended from the ceiling, its dim light casting down like the gaze of an invisible interrogator. This is where they imprison the truth, he thought, heart pounding as he stepped inside. I know it well. Rooms like these are often where horrifying secrets are suffocated. Another major was waiting at the head of the table, eyes narrowed sharply, scrutinizing Robert like a predator. The lieutenant motioned for him to sit opposite, and as he settled onto the hard chair, The others quietly took positions on either side of the table. No one spoke. The silence was heavy as a stone on Robert's chest, their gazes piercing him as if trying to extract something he didn't know. Robert wondered if he should speak first, but the Major broke the silence. "All right, what happened out there, Private?" His voice was flat, cold as steel, devoid of emotion. "Tell me everything." Robert swallowed hard, feeling like he was standing before a secret tribunal, where words could be the knife that ended him. "Sir, my patrol team." Robert began, his voice trembling but trying to stay coherent. He recounted everything from leaving the vehicle to the sight of the giant snake appearing like a waking nightmare. The Major listened, his eyes sharpening as he requested, "Don't leave out a single detail." Robert felt the chill from that gaze. Not curiosity, but suspicion lurking. Throughout his story, no one in the room spoke. No one moved. Pure hell, Robert thought silently. I swear none of them even blinked. The air was thick, as if time had stopped, and he was the only prey in this trap. I've read accounts that interrogations like this aren't just about finding the truth, but about breaking the witness's spirit. When he finished, Robert glanced around the room, hoping for a glimmer of belief or at least scientific curiosity. But there was none. The Major's face remained impassive as stone, his eyes flicking towards the door behind Robert, as if awaiting a signal from an invisible specter, then back to stare straight at him. The silence became suffocating, like an unspoken warning. "Tell me again what happened, son," the Major suddenly said, his tone shifting to a falsely familiar one, but his eyes remained cold as ice. "I want to hear it again. Think I missed something." A chill ran down Robert's spine. This wasn't a request, but a psychological trap being set. "I'd only been in the Army 2 years, Robert told me later. Usually it's the NCOs who yell at you. But when a high-ranking officer acts like this..." He trailed off, his voice faint. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, just reported the truth. So why were they looking at him like a criminal? It seemed the Major was trying to sow confusion, a classic tactic to control a witness. The Major's way of speaking made Robert start doubting himself. Was the giant snake real? Or just a hallucination brought on by battlefield stress? "He made me wonder if I was crazy," he recalled, even though it had all just happened hours before. Confusion arose, like another monster gnawing at his mind from within. But then the Major demanded he recount it again. What did he want? A hint that he should change the story? Or did he know something Robert hadn't mentioned? "If I lie, they'll find out," Robert reasoned internally. "They'll compare it with the others' reports." He had no choice but to cling to the terrifying truth he had witnessed. So, for the second time, he told it. From the growl beneath the water to the snake crushing the cow, omitting no detail. His voice trembled, recalling the monster's red eyes, but he held firm. Once again, no one in the room spoke. When he finished, silence enveloped them. So heavy, Robert felt like the air was tightening around his throat. Robert sat there, waiting for a reaction. Anything. But only the Major's cold eyes stared through him. I've seen cases like this. When the military confronts the inexplicable, they don't seek understanding. They seek erasure. And Robert, unknowingly, stood on the line between truth and a secret darker than the snake he'd encountered. The Major leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, but his eyes kept flicking towards the door behind Robert. The others in the room also exchanged nervous glances, losing their initial cold, scrutinizing expressions, as if they had just realized a horrifying truth they didn't want to face. The Major, however, looked increasingly angry, his face flushing, as if every word from Robert was a stab at something he desperately tried to deny. I've seen reactions like this. When people face the inexplicable, they often choose anger over acceptance. And Robert, unknowingly, stood on the line between truth and a dark conspiracy. "Tell me what happened," the Major repeated, his voice sharper now, like a blade ready to strike. "I want to hear it again." Robert opened his mouth to protest, his voice desperate. "Sir." But he was cut off instantly. "That's an order. Tell me what you saw." His voice rose, full of authority and menace, making the air in the room vibrate with tension. Robert was genuinely scared. He didn't know if the Major believed him or not, but his eyes seemed intent on crushing him. "Wish I'd never opened my mouth about that damn snake," he thought, heart pounding. But it was too late now. Changing his story would contradict his teammates, and he believed the monster was a real threat superiors needed to know about. So, for the third time, Robert recounted, his voice dwindling from fear and exhaustion. He mentioned the underwater growl, the red eyes, and the snake crushing the cow like a vivid nightmare. Each word he spoke was like a stone thrown into a silent pond, but no one in the room responded. Only the Major's sharp eyes bored into him like a drill. A long silence followed, so heavy Robert found it hard to breathe. Then suddenly, the Major stood up, walked out of the room, and slammed the door shut. His voice echoed from the hallway, loud and angry, speaking to someone in Spanish. Robert strained to listen, heart pounding as he recognized the voice. Not fluent, but enough to frighten him. Robert's Spanish wasn't good, but he caught a few words. Rio Coco, agua water, comer eat. Simple words, but in this context, they sounded like curses. They're talking about the snake eating the cow, he guessed, or about it almost eating us. A chill ran down his spine as he imagined those giant teeth closing around him. Then he heard the voice of a Honduran officer, deep and haunting. El Diablo. Robert knew that word meant the devil. Next came muertos, dead, repeated several times like a deathly refrain. I have researched El Diablo extensively. It's not just a name. It symbolizes supernatural entities in Central American lore, and its appearance often coincides with death. The Honduran spoke more, while the Major only replied with short cease, as if reluctantly agreeing to a horrifying truth. El Diablo was mentioned again, this time in a lower, almost whispering tone. Robert wished he understood more Spanish. He felt like he was standing before a terrible secret, holding only one piece of the puzzle. Finally, the Major returned, walking heavily towards the head of the table but not sitting down. He leaned forward, planting both hands on the table, eyes blazing like fire. Then he began to speak, his voice thundering, full of rage, tearing apart the suffocating silence. Robert felt like he was being swept away by a hurricane, with no escape. For the next 10 minutes, the Major unleashed his fury upon Robert. "You're completely wrong about everything," he roared, his voice indignant. It was just a large anaconda, 20 feet max. A blatant denial, reducing the monster's true size to triviality. Robert was stunned. Was he distorting the truth, or did he genuinely not believe him? But sir, it was at least 75 feet long, or... Robert wanted to scream, but he sat silently, hands clenched under the table. I know the military often does this, turning supernatural phenomena into something explainable to keep everything under control. But the Major's eyes told a different story. He was afraid, and the anger was just a mask for that fear. When the Major stopped, breathing heavily, Robert felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe he was right not to change his story. Maybe they would believe him. But then he turned back to look at him, eyes cold as ice. You will not speak of this again. Understand? It wasn't a question. It was a threat, and Robert knew the truth about El Diablo would be buried forever. The Major sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're mistaken, Robert. That thing in the snake's mouth was just a dog, definitely not a full-grown cow." He emphasized each word, as if trying to crush Robert's horrific memory with a brazen denial. He ridiculed Robert relentlessly, turning the sight of the giant snake into a ludicrous farce. "A 75-foot snake? You think you're telling fairy tales?" The Major laughed loudly, but the sound held no mirth. It was cold, like an echo from a tomb. Robert felt heat rise in his face, but he dared not resist the Major's fury. "You fabricated everything," the Major accused, his voice sharp as a knife. "We saw nothing unusual, just some leaves and branches floating on the river." The lie was frighteningly smooth, as if he had prepared a script to erase the truth. The Major leaned closer, eyes blazing. "Your stupid story could ruin diplomatic relations with Honduras. Do you want to be seen as a saboteur?" It was the political card, a familiar tactic to silence the truth. Robert felt his heart clench. He wasn't just facing the snake, but a system ready to crush him to protect its interests. "If you insist the snake was over 75 feet, the Major threatened, his voice dropping low and menacing, "you'll pay dearly. Falsifying an official report, or worse." He didn't elaborate, but Robert understood. Article 15 or a court-martial hung over him like a scythe. Career, freedom, all could vanish just because he dared speak the truth. Robert felt desperate, suffocatingly helpless. He had no power to argue with a high-ranking officer like the Major. Change the story or be destroyed. The message was clear as daylight. "You're a fool," the Major concluded, slumping back into his chair, face tense. "Don't throw away your career over nonsense like this." At this point, Robert noticed all eyes in the room were no longer on him. They stared at the Major, shocked by his outburst. But no one dared speak, as if afraid of being drawn into his vortex of anger. The silence wasn't agreement, but the fear of punishment for knowing too much. A minute of heavy silence passed, the air thick enough to choke them all. Then the Major leaned forward again, his voice calmer now but still laden with threat. "Last time, tell me what you saw." His eyes locked onto Robert, like a predator ready to pounce if its prey dared resist again. With the weight of the threat pressing down on him, Robert bowed his head, whispering a completely different story. "We only saw logs and brush floating on the river," he said, each word a stab to his own self-respect. He knew he was betraying the truth, but he had no other choice. "Before leaving, we saw a normal snake," he continued, his voice faint. "It carried off a small animal, maybe a rabbit or an unlucky dog." The lie slipped smoothly from his lips, but a wave of nausea churned inside him. He was saving his career, but the price was his own soul. When he finished, Robert sat still, staring at the tabletop, feeling empty and humiliated. The Major finally relaxed, a fleeting smile crossing his lips. Not joy, but the satisfaction of a victor. The tension in the room dissipated, as if Robert's lie had dispelled a dark curse. The Major stood up, thanking Robert for his time in a casual tone, then walked out the door as if nothing had happened. But as he turned down the hall, Robert overheard faintly, "Don't forget those audio tapes." His initial testimony, evidence of El Diablo, would be destroyed or hidden forever in the darkness of this base. The lieutenant finally spoke, his voice full of sarcasm. "Feeling better now, Specialist?" Robert didn't answer, just sat there, feeling like he'd sold his soul to another demon. Not the snake in the river, but the system ready to bury the truth. I, Ethan, knew this moment would haunt him forever. A a scar deeper than any battlefield wound. Robert just shrugged, speechless, his mind reeling with unanswered questions. What happens next? What will they do to me? He felt like a trapped animal, unsure when the blade would fall. He was escorted outside, the dim light of Sotokano Base illuminating his pale face. A vehicle took him back to the initial drop-off point, and he was told he would return to the camp at the Airfield construction site. But the cold order followed. Do not discuss the incident with anyone, including those who were with you. The gag order felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Another vehicle appeared shortly after, and Robert was told to get in. He climbed aboard, heart pounding as he realized he was alone. None of his patrol teammates were with him. They're separating us, he thought, a cold fear rising. Often, isolation measures like this signal a larger conspiracy aimed at eliminating witnesses. I don't want to sound dramatic, Robert told me later, but I was only 21 then, and with everything that had happened, I honestly thought I might never make it back. As the vehicle moved, a chilling question echoed in his mind. Will I ever see my mom again? He imagined they weren't taking him back to camp, but to a darker place, where soldiers who knew too much often disappeared without a trace. Fortunately, his worst fears didn't materialize. The vehicle took him straight back to the airfield, but the relief was fleeting. Another sergeant waited, escorting him to his quarters with a cold gaze. For the next 3 days, Robert's life was confined within 4 walls. Sleep, eat, shower, nothing more. He felt like a ghost trapped in a cage, no one mentioning what had happened. 3 long days passed in isolation and anxiety, like an unspoken sentence. Then he was taken back to Sotokano again, put on a plane bound for Fort Bragg. As he boarded, he noticed the cabin was nearly empty, only a few scattered individuals. A Honduran soldier in uniform, a sergeant with 3 stripes and a rocker, sat a few rows behind him. The plane took off, the engine's roar mingling with Robert's racing heartbeat. Once they reached cruising altitude, the Honduran soldier stood up and approached him. He leaned down, whispering softly, "May I sit beside you?" Robert nodded, but internally he was tense as a drawn bowstring. Was this another military trap to test him? "So, you saw the devil," the Honduran soldier said, his eyes gleaming with meaning, looking straight at Robert. "And he saw you too." His voice was low, as if sharing an ancient secret. Robert felt his blood run cold. El Diablo wasn't just his private nightmare, but a real entity whispered about by locals. "You must be a good man," the soldier continued, his voice tinged with awe, "because he did not eat you that day. You are very lucky. Many people disappear along the Coco River when the devil is hungry." Robert was stunned, unable to believe his ears. Part of him wanted to believe this was the truth, that the giant snake wasn't a hallucination, but a horror known and feared by Hondurans for ages. But after everything he'd just endured, the threats, the interrogation, the pressure from the major, Robert remained wary. "I was paranoid he was setting me up," he recounted to me, "to get me to violate the order not to talk." He stayed silent, not responding, though a wave of emotion surged within him. The truth was right there, but he dared not touch it. The Honduran soldier didn't seem bothered by Robert's silence. He made the sign of the cross on his chest, a gesture both reverent and fearful, as if seeking protection from a higher power. Then he stood up and quietly returned to his seat, leaving Robert with his chaotic thoughts. I believe that gesture wasn't just superstition. It was evidence of a real fear, deeply ingrained in the local culture. As the plane continued its journey, Robert sat there, staring out the window into the black void outside. He felt as though he had just escaped one nightmare, only to fall into another. Self-doubt. El Diablo was real, but he had been forced to bury it beneath lies. An emptiness enveloped him, as if he had left a part of his soul behind in Honduras. When the plane landed at Fort Bragg, Robert stepped out, the cold American air filling his lungs. He didn't know if he was truly safe. The audio tapes, the threats, and the Honduran soldier's eyes still haunted him. His story didn't end here. El Diablo might have spared him, but the shadow of the truth would follow him for the rest of his life. The rest of the flight passed in heavy silence. Robert sat there, gaze lost in the black void outside the window, as if the darkness outside mirrored the unease within him. Back at Fort Bragg, everything proceeded normally. No incidents, no fuss. But something felt off. I wouldn't say I was ostracized, Robert told me, his voice low. But the atmosphere was different. Like someone had whispered something to command about me. Averted gazes, cold nods, all felt like invisible warnings that he had been marked. Just 1 month later, Robert was abruptly transferred to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, suspiciously close to his Tennessee home. "I'd only served 2 years," he said. "Sudden transfers like this usually happen when there's a problem. Harassment, assault, or to erase a black mark." He felt like he'd been given an escape ticket, but the price was constant suspicion gnawing at his mind. "Professor Ethan, don't you find that strange?" Robert asked me, his eyes filled with bewilderment. "Sending me closest to home, like a favor for keeping quiet." He suspected command had done it intentionally, a tacit thank you for obeying orders. But then he realized something else. Instead of being in the barracks with roommates, he was assigned a small apartment alone, a privilege he didn't deserve. I wondered if it was another way to isolate me, Robert mused, so I wouldn't have anyone to tell that crazy story to. The isolation wasn't just a reward. It was a sophisticated cage, keeping him under control. I've seen measures like this. When the military can't erase a witness, they isolate him from the world. At Fort Campbell, ironically, Robert faced a series of other strange experiences. Stories I will analyze later. "To me," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "that's just how the world works. Weird things happen, and we can't always explain them." But in his heart, El Diablo never left. It became a haunting shadow throughout his life. Robert admitted he researched giant snakes for years afterward, an obsession he couldn't shake. He scoured books, listened to rumors from the old jungles of Central America, and even read through sealed military reports he could access. "I needed to know what it was," he whispered to me, as if understanding El Diablo would return the part of his soul he'd lost. Besides the rare documented 30-foot anacondas, science had discovered fossils of Titanoboa in Colombia, a giant snake from prehistoric times. But even that discovery was accidental, when coal miners unintentionally unearthed a few bones. They only had a short time before the machinery destroyed everything, I explained, and what remained were just a few vertebrae. No skull, not a complete skeleton. Based on comparisons with modern snakes, scientists estimated Titanoboa was about 45 feet long, living 60 million years ago. "I'm no scientist," Robert said, his voice full of skepticism. "But I know what we saw wasn't from 60 million years ago. It was there, just a few decades ago, alive and terrifying. The 75-80 foot size he estimated far exceeded any record, challenging modern science. Could it be a descendant of Titanoboa? Robert wondered. Or a completely different species, never discovered? I suspect El Diablo isn't just a natural creature. It bears supernatural markings, an entity awakened by the blood and chaos of war." The words of the Honduran soldier on the plane still echoed. "He saw you." "You are very lucky," that soldier had said, "because the devil did not eat you." Robert remembered his eyes. Not superstitious, but certain, like someone who had witnessed too much loss. "Many people disappear along the Coco River," he had whispered, "when he is hungry." If he was right, then the people of Honduras still live in fear of El Diablo today, a ghost that never rests. As he finished his story, Robert paused, leaving a heavy silence. "I don't blame them," he said, his voice low and sad. Living next to something like that, who wouldn't be afraid? He looked at me, eyes full of unspoken questions. Does El Diablo truly exist, or is it just his private nightmare? And the truth lies somewhere between science and legend, a mystery the world isn't ready to face. As the story concluded, Robert sighed, as if shedding an invisible burden. But the air remained heavy, filled with unease. What else do the dark corners of this world hide? He wondered. And so did I. El Diablo isn't just a snake. It's a symbol of the inexplicable. Secrets that both the military and science wish to bury, leaving us with nameless fear. Robert's story is a classic case of the intersection between anomalous phenomena, military secrecy, and the psychological impact on witnesses. It reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying truth isn't the monsters in the dark, but the lengths humans will go to conceal them.